UAW and Ford reaching a tentative deal to end a nearly 6-week strike with the automaker. Phil LeBeau joins us this morning.
They finalized the deal. Tentative agreement calls for a 25% pay hike over the next 4.5 years. Goes over 30% when you add in cost of living adjustments. They're also reducing the number of wage tiers, a big push by the UAW. And there's more profit sharing for retirees.
So the question is, who caved first, Ford or the UAW? From a historical perspective, union strikes are high-profile events where the companies they are striking against are dragged through the mud and the C-suite executives and industry analysts cry mercy, screaming they don't have any more money to give. But in all actuality, the companies wield the power in the negotiations. Without the employer, there would be no employees, and that's the crux of things. Looking back at the 1945-46 UAW strikes against General Motors, the union demanded a wage increase of 30%, along with stipulations that the prices of their cars wouldn't increase because of the raise. Of course, the UAW was rebuffed immediately, and GM claimed they cannot afford such a large wage increase. For many, the UAW's request that prices not increase on the cars GM made was surprising, but just might be the reality of a business should costs like labor go up. Yesterday, Ford and the UAW's agreement to a tentative deal was matched with an increase of Ford F-150 Lightning prices for the 2024 model year. Interestingly, not only does that come on the back of an agreement to increase wages and benefits, but also a severe drop in 2023 Lightning deliveries last quarter, just shy of 50%. With the new pricing scheme, the Pro Lightnings will be $2,095 more, the XLTs are $2,500 higher, and the Lariats are a whopping $9,595 more than its 2023 version. Maybe the UAW president from the 1940s strike, Walter Reuther, was right about car companies causing inflation, but it does beg the question, how does Ford reconcile the lack of their EV demand with increased prices? We'll just have to wait and see, but it wasn't like they had a choice though. According to their earnings call today, Ford said if the UAW was to ratify the contract, the additional labor costs would amount to up to $900 per vehicle, and the strikes cost the company $1.3 billion due to a loss of production of 80,000 vehicles. And that brings us to the next point, the ratification.
How about UAW? The costs, just like Phil said, they remove guidance because they don't know what the costs are going to be. And we've seen that with UPS. UPS, when they settle their labor dispute, they still don't know what the knock-on effects are going to be. So this could have knock-on effects for months, maybe even years later to Ford.
A tentative agreement between Ford and the UAW requires the vote of all the union members, and the majority will have it. We've seen that the UAW is quick to come to a tentative agreement with Mack Trucks earlier on in this strike. The workers would have gotten 10% in their first year, and within 5 years, a total of a 20% increase, but they didn't ratify the contract, and instead decided to strike. Maybe that was a smart play because we're already seeing the Detroit 3 above 20% and at a faster rate than Mack Truck would have wanted. But should the Ford workers not vote in agreement with the negotiations team's plan, they'll be out in the cold, literally, while they picket because winter is just around the corner, and how much longer can they survive on just $100 a day? But still, 25% is a far cry from 40% the UAW was initially proposing. Walter Reuther's strikes resolution in the post-World War II era echoes the making of the tentative deal for Thane's agreement with Ford. I mentioned Reuther was looking for a 30% wage increase for his membership from GM in 1945, but as the months passed, leverage over GM would wane. It wasn't the UAW doing anything wrong, but it was more about the other strikes across the country that were occurring at the same time, resolving themselves. The mid-1940s would see workers from all industries standing up against management in what would be called the strike wave. Two of the largest unions, the Steelworkers Union and the Electricians Union, didn't have the stomach for a drawn-out battle with their employers and quickly took a 17.5% raise in just over a month. That was the writing on the wall for the UAW, and about 5 months into their strike, they settled on a raise of 18.5 cents an hour, or in percentage terms, 17.5%, just like the other unions got.
Today, we reached a tentative agreement with Ford. For months, we've said that record profits mean record contracts. And UAW family, our stand-up strike has delivered.
This pressure might have forced Thane to acquiesce to Ford's offer of 25%, which would have been the best offer amongst the Detroit 3. Some of the pressure came from our friends to the north, Canada's Unifor Union, that agreed to a contract with Ford for a 20 to 25% raise depending on job position. UPS recently prevailed after a highly publicized strike and received a $2.75 per hour raise that scaled over the course of a few years to a little over $7 more per hour. But with some driver positions paying $42 or more an hour, the raise might be only a handful of percent. The United Airlines Pilots Union talked strike this past summer, but the airline eventually agreed to a 14 to 19% raise over the first few years of their new contract. Healthcare workers at Kaiser Permanente weren't too happy with their pay either and went on strike twice this past year and finally secured a 21% raise in wages, 6% this year, and 5% more in the following 3 years. So Fain's demands were essentially comp to the other strike agreements, and he felt like this was the most the union was going to get. It's likely not coincidence that the UAW walked out of each of the most profitable factories of the Big Three in what could be the last few days of the strike. Many analysts would say it was theatrics, something to show their membership they did everything they could to make the strike as painful as possible, but in reality, the UAW was tapping out. So once again, the labor movement took hold of the country after decades of worker wages that grew slowly or were just outright stagnant, especially compared to executive pay and inflation. And though hundreds of thousands of them are better off today than they were just some months ago, this is more just a catch-up than anything else. If GM and Stellantis fall into line and match Ford's offer, I think the focus will quickly shift to the toll the strike has taken on the automotive industry and how Detroit is no more competitive and are actually less competitive than they were yesterday.